The gray sky hangs low over the narrow streets of my hometown, like an old tarnished mirror I'd rather not look into. A thin mist drapes over the wet asphalt, the cold air thick with the scent of dampness and memories frozen in these alleys and old brick buildings. Paul and I drive slowly, and though I remember every turn, every house, every tree here, the town feels unfamiliar, and we feel like strangers to each other. Paul focuses on the road, seemingly oblivious to my fingers fidgeting with the ring on my hand. This town once seemed like the place of beginnings, the place where I dreamed, where my ambitions felt vast, stretching beyond the horizon. My childhood passed here, yet now, as we drive past half-closed shops and shabby facades, it's hard to believe this is the same town I once longed for in my thoughts. Paul doesn't ask how I feel, and I don't dare start the conversation. I know he sees the change in me, but we both avoid looking directly at each other. It's been a long time since I dreamed of what once bound us more tightly than words or promises. Now, what we have is more like friendship, strengthened by respect and memories of the past. I respect him for his kindness, his patience, his habit of always taking care of me. But a heavy silence has settled between us, and I'm not sure when it grew so burdensome. As we approach the neighborhood where my daughter now lives, I feel a mounting sense of anxiety. My grown-up girl, Emily, whom I'd always pictured as happy and full of life, recently moved here with her husband, Nate. I haven't yet gotten used to the fact that she has her own family now, her own adult worries and decisions, in which I don't interfere. Although we've always been close, I've recently noticed a chill between us, as if she's placed a thin but impenetrable wall between us. And now, as we near her house, this feeling of estrangement presses on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Paul stops the car by the entrance, and I find myself holding my gaze on him. He smiles softly, exhaling as if he too senses the tension of this visit, but he says nothing. I'm grateful for his silence, for the support he offers without words. Emily meets us at the door, but her smile seems strained, barely masking something unsettling. She gives me a brief hug, and the way she averts her eyes speaks louder than any words. We stand in silence, as though each of us fears disturbing a fragile boundary that none of us wants to be the first to cross. As we step inside the house, I feel the space between Emily and me tightening, filled with unspoken words and hidden glances. She walks ahead in silence, leading us to the living room. The room is cozy, simple, and everything in it reminds me of my Emily as I used to know her. Caring, a bit dreamy, sincere. But now, in her face, in her movements, in each of her gestures, there's a coldness, as if she shut herself off and hidden the warmth that always kept our bond close. Paul loosens his scarf, clearing his throat a bit awkwardly, and tries to make conversation about the house, the move, how they're settling in. Emily smiles at him, but her gaze doesn't linger. She seems somewhere else. I can feel the tension with every fiber of my being, and the silence between us grows unbearable. It's hard to believe that she once shared everything with me, told me every little detail of her life. And now, standing before me is a grown woman with a look on her face that tells me she doesn't want to reveal her secrets, not even to her mother. When Paul goes back to the car to bring in our gift for them, I muster the courage to speak. I reach out, gently touching her hand, and she instinctively pulls it away, as though my touch stings. The reaction burns me. I'm not used to seeing her like this, guarded, distant. And finally, I dare to ask, Emily, sweetheart, is something wrong? You can tell me if anything is bothering you. She holds my gaze for a long, cold moment, and in her eyes I see something that makes my heart clench. But she just looks away, leaning toward the table as if looking for something in her bag, and replies dryly, Mom, I'm fine. There's just a lot going on. Moving, work. She tries to make it sound as if it really is just that simple, but her voice wavers, and I know that something's not right. I try to keep calm, but her words don't reassure me. I see my daughter before me, yet she feels like a stranger. It's as if walls separate us. Walls I don't know how to break down. My mother's heart beats with worry. I sense that she needs help, but she's not letting me in. Perhaps she doesn't want me to know that she's struggling. Paul returns with the gift, a beautiful blanket we chose for them. He hands it over cheerfully, but even that doesn't melt the ice between Emily and me. She thanks us, smiling, but the smile barely reaches her eyes. She glances at Nate, who steps out of the kitchen, and I notice how the tension in her gaze intensifies. It's at that moment I realize, for the first time, that her pain, her hidden distress, is somehow connected to him. In that instant, I felt as if before me wasn't just a daughter who had stopped sharing her troubles with her mother, but a woman bearing a burden within her soul, one I couldn't reach no matter how hard I tried. Paul and I sit in the living room, chatting with Nate about their life since the move, but my gaze keeps drifting back to Emily. She sits with her legs pulled up, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles are white. Paul and Nate are talking animatedly, while she merely nods occasionally, barely looking up. My daughter, who once lit up every room, now has dim, distant eyes, as if lost in some world of her own. At one point, I can't hold back any longer, and, leaning in quietly so as not to interrupt the men, I murmur to her, "Emily, maybe we could talk? Just the two of us?" She flinches, her face momentarily hardening into a frosty mask, but then she glances over at Nate as though seeking his approval or permission. He, absorbed in his conversation with Paul, doesn't notice her look. Emily, without meeting my eyes, whispers almost inaudibly, "Mom, now, isn't the best time?" Those words sting. She's never hidden from me before. But I see something in her eyes. Anxiety, fear perhaps? As if she's afraid that if she starts talking, all her emotions will spill out, shattering the fragile balance she's clinging to. Then, suddenly, Nate interrupts Paul mid-sentence, his tone loud, even harsh. "Emily, will you get us some tea?" His voice is commanding, as though he's used to issuing orders. She flinches, then quickly stands up and heads to the kitchen without looking at anyone. I cast a quick glance at him. Beneath his fleeting smile, something unsettling lurks. He catches me looking, and his smile widens, but his eyes are hard, appraising. Does he sense that I'm beginning to suspect something? For a moment, it feels like he's testing me, as if I'm supposed to stay within the role he has set for me. I hear Emily clattering dishes in the kitchen, the noise oddly loud in this stretched silence. Unable to bear the tension any longer, I turn to Nate, trying to keep my voice steady, though it betrays a slight tremor. "Nate, if there's anything you two are going through, I'm always here to help. I'll always be here for Emily." He pauses, blinking slowly as if weighing my words, then finally smirks, his tone cool, with a touch of biting mockery. "I know, sweet mother-in-law, but we've got everything under control." The words, spoken loudly with a deliberate edge, sting. Paul, oblivious to the tension, laughs at something, but I can no longer focus. I watch as Nate, reclining smugly into the couch, keeps his eyes on me, as if testing just how far he can push. Emily returns with a tray, setting the cups down without meeting anyone's gaze, then sits beside him. He wraps his arm around her shoulders, but his hand grips her as though in a vice, and I notice her face growing even paler. She tries to smile, but it's forced, lifeless. I can't help myself, and barely above a whisper, I ask, almost afraid of the answer, "Emily, is everything all right?" She stiffens, refusing to meet my eyes, and replies curtly, almost with a hint of desperation, "Mom, please stop. Everything's fine." Those words push me back, and I feel a powerless anger simmering inside me. My daughter is guarding her cage, the prison that Nate seems all too eager to build around her. In the evening, as everyone is preparing to leave, Nate unexpectedly offers to drive Paul and me back to the hotel. Paul, worn out from the long trip, agrees without hesitation, while I feel an inexplicable unease. During the ride, I sit in silence in the back seat, looking out the window, my thoughts circling back to Emily. Something's wrong. I feel it deeply, sensing her anxiety, her fear, but she's keeping me at a distance, unwilling to let me close. Finally, we reach the hotel. Paul steps out, waves to me, and heads inside. I start to follow him, but Nate stops me, his hand resting on my shoulder just a little longer than necessary. I freeze, feeling a strange sense of alertness. And then he leans slightly toward me, his voice low, carrying a barely perceptible hint of a smile. You know, Anna, I've always loved these quiet evenings, when you can listen to your thoughts, get to know yourself, and others. He emphasizes the last words, his gaze piercing as if it's reaching beneath my skin. As if waking from a strange trance, I nod awkwardly, pull back, and quickly step out of the car. My hand trembles as I close the door, my heart racing. It was odd, unsettling, and somehow frightening. Everything he said, the way he acted, left a sour taste, something I wanted to shake off. That night, I can't sleep. I lie in the dim hotel room, listening to Paul's steady breathing beside me, my mind churning with conflicting emotions. His hand rests beside mine, just a centimeter away. And in the silence, in the long hours of the night, I suddenly feel the emptiness that has quietly settled between us over the years. This emptiness has grown, becoming something more than just a lack of passion. And now, with everything around me feeling so intensified, I can't ignore it any longer. The next morning, I meet Emily and Nate for coffee. Paul has gone off to take care of some business, leaving the three of us alone. Nate sits directly across from me, his gaze fixed on me so intensely that I feel as if I'm under a spotlight. His attention returns to me again and again, almost shamelessly. His stare, bold, inappropriate, too direct, is impossible to ignore. When Emily turns away to pay for the coffee, Nate leans closer and, in a low voice with a tone of unsettling interest, says, "Anna, you look so young for your age. I'd never guess you're already a grown mother." I feel a sudden tension inside me. His words are jarring, carrying an undertone I can't bring myself to accept. My first instinct is to pull away, but Emily returns to the table and I just give a quick nod, avoiding his gaze. But his behavior doesn't stop there. He continues to cast brief, assessing glances in my direction, and with every passing minute, it becomes harder to stay seated with him. Emily seems oblivious to these looks, and that alarms me even more. How can she be so wrapped up in her own world that she doesn't notice the obvious? Or perhaps she does see it, but chooses to look the other way? These past few days have wrapped my thoughts in a strange, sticky tension that's impossible to shake. I keep telling myself it's just awkwardness, a passing discomfort, but knowing Nate is the cause fills me with fear and shame. I avoid his glances, try to stay close to Emily, but his presence seems everywhere, in every casual touch, in every lingering look, in each word with hints that feel out of place. And so, one evening, after Paul left to meet old friends and Emily went to visit a friend, I found myself alone in the house. She mentioned she'd be back late, and I settled down in the living room with a cup of tea and a book, hoping I could finally relax, breathe, let go of these heavy thoughts. But instead, shadows of Nate fill the empty room, his presence tangling in my mind. Then, an abrupt knock at the door. I freeze, a sense of foreboding tightening my chest, but I stand and open the door. Nate is standing there, a bottle of wine in his hand, his gaze strangely intense, focused. He smiles, slightly shrugging, as if to apologize for the sudden visit, but there's no hesitation in his actions. "Hello," he says softly, almost too softly, as if his presence should remain a secret. "Emily mentioned you were alone. I thought we could have a drink." For company, I nod almost instinctively, stepping aside to let him in, unable to refuse. He walks into the living room, unzipping his jacket and settling on the couch with an ease that's unsettling, as though he belongs here. I close the door, trying to keep up a pretense of normalcy, and go to fetch glasses. Inside, I'm trembling, my mind blank. That brief moment, the chance not to let him in, has passed, and now I'm being drawn by an invisible force that I can't resist. When I return, he's already poured the wine, holding out a glass for me, and with a faint smile says, "To meetings that come unexpectedly." His voice is soft, yet there's a hidden tension in it, and his words catch me like a hook. We sip our wine, and I try to talk about trivial things, but every word, every gesture feels strained. I'm certain he senses it, sees my discomfort, and enjoys it. At some point, as our conversation drifts to old memories, he suddenly leans closer. I feel his hand on my shoulder, warm, assured, and his closeness sends a confusing, forbidden thrill through me. His gaze roams across my face, lingers on my eyes, my lips, as if seeking something beyond silent consent. I know I should pull away, that nothing good can come of this, but I feel paralyzed by the intensity of the moment, where everything seems to blur. His gaze, intense and beckoning, pulls me in more deeply, like waves washing over the shore. He leans in, his breath warm as he whispers, barely brushing my hair. "Anna, you feel it too, don't you?" His voice is soft, so close that it steals my breath. "There's something between us." Summoning my resolve, I whisper, my voice fragile yet defiant. His hand gently touches my cheek, and the gesture, simple, almost innocent, makes me forget everything, surrender to the moment, ignoring all consequences. And then he kisses me. Since then, every glance, every accidental touch between us is filled with a secret meaning that makes me feel both terrified and thrilled. We arrange to meet when Emily is at work and Paul is absorbed in his own affairs. Each time I tell myself it will be the last, that I need to stop, that this path leads only to ruin. But when I stand before him, I lose all capacity for reason. The desire pulls me in like a whirlpool. These meetings aren't a fleeting spark of passion that simply caught me off guard. No, it's more complicated, deeper. I feel each conversation, each gesture, every word of his filling a part of me that I had felt starved for so long. He looks at me in a way no one has in years, as if he sees a woman in me that I'd almost forgotten existed. One day, we meet in a small cafe on the far side of town where no one would know us. I try to appear calm, but inside I'm trembling with excitement. We sit at a table by the window, and he takes my hand, leaning in just close enough for me to hear his whisper. "Anna, isn't it strange that we found each other now? Of all times?" His words, spoken softly as if they were a secret, linger in the air, leaving a bitter, lingering taste. I feel the bitterness of our forbidden connection, the ache that each moment of closeness brings, repaid by restless nights and the gnawing pang of guilt. I know this is wrong, that it could all fall apart, but whenever we're together, all doubts dissolve. "Nate." I try to respond, but my voice trembles, betraying me, leaving my words unfinished. He watches me intently, as if searching my eyes for an answer, and I realize I have nothing to say, because he's already become a part of me. Inseparable. Inexplicable. These secret meetings are no longer just a habit. They're a need. I feel as if I found a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. Yet with each day, with each minute we're together, I'm haunted by guilt toward Emily. She's my daughter, my joy, and I'm betraying her in a way no one else could. In the evenings when I return home, she greets me with a light smile, and I have to hide my thoughts, look away so she won't see the turmoil within me. But Nate, he's relentless. With each conversation, each word, he soothes my anxiety, telling me that what we feel isn't just a mistake. It's something more. Something that could change our lives. I don't know whether to believe him. I'm torn between pain and passion, between wanting to reclaim something I've lost and the fear of losing my daughter forever. When we're together, when it's just the two of us, he speaks the words I want to hear, the words that make everything shift. One day, after another deep conversation, he leans close, takes my hand, and his voice drops to a barely audible whisper. "Anna, don't you think you deserve to be happy?" Paul remains oblivious. He talks to me in the evenings, sometimes jokes, even shares small parts of his day with me. But now, his words, his calm gaze, and his touches feel distant, almost forgotten. I realize we no longer speak the same language, and this emptiness that has settled between us only drives me further into Nate's arms. Each time I return to Emily, I look at her, and the guilt nearly suffocates me. She doesn't notice any changes, but something in her eyes, in her smile, hints that a wall has risen between us, too. Over time, my relationship with Nate begins to loom over us like a dark cloud, ready to break into a downpour. Although I carefully conceal everything, I sense that Emily is starting to suspect. She's become more attentive, her gaze sharper, and her questions increasingly lead to awkward silences that make me feel cornered. One evening, while I'm visiting their home, Emily suddenly initiates a conversation. She looks tired, but her gaze is intense, as if she's trying to see through me, to catch something elusive. We're sitting in the kitchen, and for the first time in a while, Paul isn't around. Emily stays silent longer than usual, as though waiting for the right moment. And then quietly, but insistently, she asks, "Mom, you know you can tell me anything, right?" Her voice carries an undertone of suspicion, and it's hard not to notice. I nod, but a chill settles inside me. Each word echoes in my mind, intensifying the unease I've been trying to suppress. She doesn't look away, and I feel her steady gaze pulling the truth from me. "Then why?" She trails off, her expression hardening. "Are you acting so strange? Mom, what's going on? You don't seem like yourself." She watches my reaction carefully, and I know I need to choose my words with utmost caution. I take a deep breath, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. "Emily, sweetheart, I'm just worried about you. I feel like you're unhappy." She turns away, her face closing off, becoming almost detached. She stays silent for a moment, then, without looking at me, murmurs, "That's none of your business, Mom. I need to figure things out on my own." Just then, Nate walks in. He sees us sitting at the table in this tense moment, and his gaze lingers on me briefly, filled with that familiar warmth I know too well. I immediately avert my eyes, feeling a tremor deep within me. Emily looks at him, and for a fleeting moment, her face reflects something like pain, as if she's seeing something she doesn't want to acknowledge. She stands, straightens her shoulders, her gaze cold and distant. "I'm going to the store," she says curtly, and leaves without looking back, leaving us alone. I remain with Nate, and he approaches me, reaching for my hand, but I pull back sharply, knowing this can't go on. "Nate, this has to end," I say, my voice breaking. Emily's starting to suspect. This has gone too far, and I can't do this anymore. He looks at me, baffled, then steps closer, lowering his voice to a barely audible whisper. "Anna, this isn't just some fling. I love you, don't you understand?" I freeze. Those words, so intense, so long-awaited, would have uplifted me under different circumstances, but now they feel like a sentence. Everything inside me tears apart because, despite the thrill, I know that each moment brings not only joy but unbearable pain. "Nate, this is impossible," I whisper. "We're betraying her. We're ruining her life. I can't go on like this. I have to stop." His face darkens, but he doesn't pull away. His voice is firm, almost resolute. "We're destroying our own lives, Anna. Can't you see that? You deserve happiness, not—" He hesitates, catching his breath. Not a hollow shadow of what could have been. In that moment, the door swings open, and Emily steps back inside. She stands on the threshold, looking at us with an expression that makes me feel as if she can see right through everything I've tried to hide. She looks at me, then at Nate, and her eyes fill with pain and suspicion, becoming almost palpable. Emily stands at the doorway, her gaze fixed on us. Her face is pale, her eyes cold, as if she's suddenly grasped everything, and the silence between us grows unbearable. Nate, seemingly oblivious to the tension, takes a step toward her and forces a smile, trying to diffuse the situation. "You were quick. Your mom and I were just talking about something," he says, his voice strained. And I can see that Emily isn't buying either his words or his smile. She shifts her gaze to me. It's not just suspicion anymore. It's the certainty that something repulsive and painful has been laid bare before her. Her eyes are a storm of emotions: confusion, hurt, and fury. My lips tremble, and I open my mouth to say something, to justify myself, to explain, but the words don't come. "Mom," she says softly, but her voice is thick with pain. "What does this mean?" My heart clenches. I want to go to her, to explain, to tell her it's a mistake, that it's not what she thinks. But I know that would be a lie. In every word, in every movement, I can feel the last threads of trust between us fraying and snapping. Clinging to some semblance of dignity, I take a step toward her and murmur, almost in a whisper, "Emily, I can't explain. But I'm sorry." The words sound pitiful, weak. I feel the weight of her gaze pressing into me. Her eyes filling with tears, she stubbornly holds back, her jaw clenched. Her shoulders shake, but she stands firm, refusing to look away. Her voice becomes almost steely. "You betrayed me, my own mother." Her words hit like a slap, cutting deep, leaving raw wounds. "Emily, please." I try to say something, anything, but she's already turned her attention to Nate, her face now twisted with pain and disgust. "And you," her voice breaks, "you told me you loved me, that we could get through anything. And yet—" She trails off, unable to continue. In that moment, I see Nate lower his head. There's no regret on his face, but even he seems to grasp that we've crossed a line that can't be erased with a smile or an apology. Emily stands there, trembling, her hands clenched into fists, looking at us with such agony that I fear she might crumble. "Leave," she whispers, her voice choked with barely contained tears, but there's a finality, an unyielding resolve in her tone. "Both of you, I don't want to see you." I try to protest, but her gaze stops me cold. Anything I could say is meaningless in the face of her pain, and I feel everything that bound us shattering. We walk out slowly, leaving her alone in the empty room, in her grief, and each step echoes with a pain I know I'll carry forever. Weeks pass. Each day, spent in silence, is a painful reminder of what I've lost. Emily doesn't answer my calls, doesn't open the door when I come by, and leaves me no hope of reconciliation. In her life, I no longer exist, and that reality strikes harder than I could have imagined. Paul sees my despair, though he doesn't understand the reason, and he tries to comfort me in his gentle, uncomplicated way. But being near him only amplifies the weight of my guilt. Sometimes I watch him, his steady kindness, his unwavering trust, and I realize how profoundly I betrayed him too. Every day this guilt drags me down, making redemption feel impossible. My life is now an endless attempt to find meaning in the broken pieces of the past. One day, I decide to try again. I go to Emily's house, not expecting her to open the door, but feeling I have to make the attempt. I owe her that much. I owe her everything. I knock. I wait. I hold my breath. And when the door finally opens, I can hardly believe it. Emily stands before me, but her face is cold and distant, as if there's nothing between us but emptiness. "Emily, forgive me," I say, and the pain in my voice brings tears to my eyes. I can't excuse what I did, but please give me a chance to explain. I never wanted to hurt you." She stares at me for a long moment, her face unreadable, though I sense the raw wound still hidden behind her guarded expression. She nods, gesturing for me to come in, but the motion is brisk, devoid of warmth. This isn't forgiveness. It's the decision of someone willing only to listen. We sit in her living room, and the silence feels like a weight pressing down on me. I don't know where to begin. She waits, her silence heavy, and I feel as if I'm before a judge about to deliver my sentence. Finally, I muster the courage to speak, my voice breaking, but I continue despite the pain. "Emily, I know I betrayed your trust. I know I can't undo anything, but I want you to know that you mean everything to me. What I did was a terrible mistake. It doesn't excuse me, but I'm begging you to consider forgiving me. She holds my gaze, struggling with her own tears, and when she speaks, her voice is quiet but firm. Mom, it hurts not just because you cheated. It hurts because you were my role model, someone I could always rely on. And now, you're the one who destroyed my life. I need time. Time to figure out how to live with that. I nod, understanding that her words are the truth, reflecting all the pain I caused. But in her voice, I sense a glimmer of something, perhaps the faintest promise, a sliver of hope that one day this wound might start to heal. Days go by and we keep our distance. Emily avoids me, and I respect her need for space, knowing that rebuilding our relationship will be a long journey. But sometimes she calls me, briefly asking about something work-related or mundane, and each call is a breath of fresh air. I try not to pressure her, to be there without overstepping. Slowly, carefully, a fragile bridge begins to form between us. I know it's just the beginning, and that I have a long road ahead to earn her trust again. But each small connection, each step, gives me hope that one day we might find a way forward together.